Tadasana. Okay. Um, Welcome for those of us who are gathered at 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I know the email didn't go through, so or didn't happen or whatever. So if we have some people who don't make it, well, now it's on Facebook perpetuity. And if somebody is like, "Hey, what's going on? I didn't get this stuff," feel free to give them the information. Let's pray. God of the universe, we have been for months now going through the story of Father Abraham. And we began to gently move past him last week as we saw Rebecca. And now, as we see the end of Abraham and the beginning of the second half of the book of Genesis and the story of Abraham's family, may we see the oddities of your grace, the goodness of your ways, and the absurdity of stories that make us realize that our absurdities are not so different from theirs. In other words, may we see you in these ancient stories, and in seeing you in these ancient stories, see you in our stories. Great author of life, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. For the couple of us who are here, last week we were talking about Rebecca. Anyone want to ask or say anything about that before we move right on and start just reading Genesis 25? Cool. Then let's do some Genesis 25.
Good.
Genesis 25 is essentially two different we can break it into two, and if I desired to be quite long-winded, we could do that, but why? It's we can pass over the first 18 verses to some degree, but we're not going to, because it's the death of Abraham. And then as we go into the second half of Genesis 25, we enter a whole new chapter, if you will. It's an interesting thing that Genesis 25 is one chapter. It almost could have been split into two, because it's the end of one story and the beginning of another. But we're in the midway point of Genesis. It's 50 chapters long, and we're in 25. So well done, y'all. We're about to make it halfway through. It only took us 8 months. Not so bad. Anyone willing to read, and I want you to know, if you're saying yes to reading, the first 6 verses of Genesis 25 have a lot of names. But if anybody would like to try to read that, by all means.
I'll give it a shot.
Oh.
One of y'all, go for it.
All right. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Epher, Hanak, Abida, and Elda. All of these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country.
All right. Well, there we go. So now we get a little insight into Abraham. And as we're getting toward the end of Abraham, we see another genealogy, but now we see a genealogy full of a bunch of people that you probably never heard of or even realized what was going on if you don't pay much attention to it. Anything that you notice?
I have a question about the use of the word concubine.
Go with it.
I thought we were talking about a wife, not a concubine.
Yeah, no, it says takes another wife, but it's using concubine. So it seems to be in that similar vein of Hagar with Ishmael, where Sarah says something like take another wife, but they keep mentioning her as the concubine or the slave girl. So it's like a both and. Like yeah, she's exclusive to you, but she's not your wife. She's not the matriarch. She's not the one, if you will. So we have Keturah here, and she doesn't get to have that kind of similar place that Sarah does. Sarah is the one who's important here, and it's kind of just letting us know that. Now Sarah's dead, and Abraham's still around, and apparently, when you're 100 and some odd years old, yeah, you still just let's have 6 more kids. And these are 6 kids that we never hear about really again. Some of the names we'll hear because they become nations
Yeah.
that the Israelites will have to deal with at various points in time, sometimes well and sometimes not so well.
Midianites stand out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Midianites we hear more often too, because there we go. and now we're learning that this is kin to the Israelites. They're sent east. Why aren't they sent west? Well, there's a sea there, right? And so it's the people that are like all around Israel to the east that are becoming this. And some of the names have been lost on in history, but again, Midian being 2 for sure that are there, and but so it's referencing a wife. He's done more. He's fulfilling through having more sons, more children, and them becoming their own nations in the Genesis narrative. It's a demonstration of the promise of God that Abraham would be a father of many nations. And so he's becoming that father of many nations. And first we noticed it with Ishmael, but now there's more. But so it's a wife concubine. She's not in the same space, and her children are not as important for the narrative or for the fulfillment of God's promises. So what makes Isaac different than Ishmael and these new 6 that we're just seeing?
Isaac was actually promised.
Isaac was actually promised. He's the impossible child.
Yeah.
The one that shouldn't happen. The one whose birth is on par with the resurrection. It's out of nothing. It's the impossibility. It's the absurdity. It's God's grace working at levels that doesn't make any sense. Now, sorry.
I also noticed that Abraham and Jacob have something in common in that they seem to have a favorite child due to them being the son of their favorite wife.
Yeah, there we go. And I mean, Sarah will always be the favorite wife. And and the favorite child thereby would be Isaac. And yet simultaneously, because he is the child of promise. Whereas, well, we're going to notice something else in this chapter, actually. Isaac is the second born. So he's the child of promise. He's the impossible child, but he's the second born. And even if he's the impossible child, if you're the second born, what are your legal rights? Assuming that wife means wife, like Abraham married Hagar. Abraham married Keturah here. But they're using concubine to, again, demonstrate, as Stephen, you just said, that this is not the favorite wife. This is just another. Who should be getting the wealth of the inheritance based off now that we know that Abraham has, before he dies, 8 sons?
Ishmael.
Ishmael should be getting it because he's the firstborn. Who's going to get it? Well, we already know. It says right here. And he sent them away from his son Isaac. because Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. All right. So Isaac gets it all, and we haven't even seen Ishmael right now. Where's Ishmael?
In the desert.
Off in the desert doing his own kind of thing, apparently. And has he been blessed in his own way?
Mhm.
Yes. And we are going to see him in a second when we move on in this chapter. He's going to come back. And we're actually going to see like the conclusion of the Ishmael story to some degree as well. But we have this genealogy, and the story of Abraham that began at the end of Genesis 11 is also a genealogy. So we're approaching the end of Abraham's story, and the beginning of his story, his call, is with a genealogy, and the end of his story is with a genealogy. And we get so many genealogies in the scripture. We're like, oh, this is boring. Look at all these names. Like, wow, 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 wow. And yet two of the four gospels start with a genealogy as well. Like, what's the deal with genealogies? The history is important. And the importance of the promise that Abraham receives is that it's being fulfilled. He was old and his wife was barren. How old was Abram back in Genesis 11? Anyone remember?
99 when he became a father.
Yeah, around 99 when he became a father. And here, though, like when he gets the call, he's 75. He's 75 when he leaves and he meanders. He goes over with Sarah and Lot. And now he's just older and he's having more children, and these things are happening, and we get to hear about some of that genealogy. And this is the only time we really get to hear about them as sons of Abraham, before they're maybe quarreling with each other and with the Israelites. And so it serves as a reminder, too, that all of these neighbors that the Israelites might be struggling with, again, are kin and are part and parcel of the promise that Abraham received. So do you think God's necessarily happy with all the ways they can't stand each other if all of these ones are supposed to come from Abraham and be kin in this region?
Probably not.
Probably
I
not.
don't think so.
No.
Mm.
So we get to see in the midst of things that family's hard. And don't you like that Genesis doesn't try to run away from that? I mean, none of that's particularly easy. And we see these pieces and things, but these other sons are given gifts. They are not left of their own accord. They're given gifts that's probably substantial gifts, and they are sent to the east, and each one of them in their own right becomes some kind of nation. And isn't that fascinating?
I mean, it is kind of interesting that the Bible feels like letting us know that Abraham seemed to have some kind of affection for his other children, even if they're never really seen ever again, and kind of pushed off to the side otherwise.
Yeah. And like it's that way. Like it reminds us that these others that are in here, while it can feel like they're pushed off to the side, they are in fact cared for. And it's good to see, because that's part of, again, Abraham's promise. He's not just suddenly without these ones. Anyway, we've done 14 minutes on a genealogy again. Congratulations, all. I hope it's anyone want to try 7 through 11? 7 through 11, like the convenience store.
Okay, I'll do it.
Thank you.
This is the death of Abraham. This is the length of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, old and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave at Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled in Be'er Lahai Roi.
All right, that was a mouthful, and good job. 175 years old. Yeah, right? Some of you who feel like you're pretty old, you got another 100 years to go.
No, thanks.
But the idea of that massive number, and it says right there, he lived to a good old age, an old man full of years. His life was actually pretty good. Was it easy?
No.
No. But
So
he
what does
gets
it mean? What does it mean that he was gathered to his people? He wasn't buried with his ancestors. What was he? They were elsewhere, weren't they?
his ancestors are from a different land, and the notion that he was again buried in the same place where he had Sarah buried is important, because the promise that Abraham receives is also for the land. So the land is always important, and the only land that he owned of that whole place, like that's his, is this land where this burial site is, where Sarah is now, where he is. The Old Testament, in the phrase gathered to his people or her people, is only found in the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible. And it signifies the way of the ancient Hebraic thought of what death was like. It's not the idea of heaven as we have today. It was the idea of Sheol, and Sheol is just the place of the dead. Neither heaven nor hell. Maybe there's actually no cognizant awareness of things. And to be gathered to your ancestors or gathered to his people is just a way of like, hey, when you're dead, you get to go be with your ancestors, kind of thing, regardless of the land on which you died. So the land is important for the continuation of the promise. The land is important because that was the promise made to Abraham. The land's important. That's why he has Sarah buried there. That's why he didn't want Isaac to leave, because that land needed to be where Isaac stayed. It's why we'll see Jacob later make Joseph promise to take him back to be buried in that same plot of land. And yet the actual idea of dying in that kind of way means you go and you're back with your people. You're back with your ancestors. You go to the place of the dead. You are now one of those who is a part of the genealogy that comes before the present. So genealogies are important for a number of reasons to the ancient people, but it lets you know that your ancestors mattered and that your descendants matter, and you are part of the lineage. How do we do the math? By the time we get to, like, how many greats do we have? Like 4,000 ancestors? I don't remember. It's like 8 though. Like, it's a lot. It doesn't take long. Think about it for a second, because we don't think of our ancestors all that much. Maybe our more immediate ancestors. But have you ever thought, if you just go back 1,000 years, that you might encounter someone who looks vaguely like you?
Maybe.
How many people needed to meet at just the right time so that you could be? Within each one of us, the stories of our ancestors are still going on. And this is not just in some kind of spiritual, mystical talk. In fact, DNA that changes and will change during life, if the traumatic events happen, carry on. They've been able to do studies that has determined that the descendants of Holocaust survivors have altered DNA from the trauma caused by the Holocaust to those who went through it. And so again, this importance of what comes before us, and the idea then that when we're no longer here, our importance is still for everything. We're gathered back to our people, back to our ancestors, back to everything. But everything that came before us is exactly why we are here right now. And isn't that remarkable? If any of your ancestors who you have no idea who they are, if anything in their life changed at all, you may not be here. And so when we die, to go and become a permanent part of the story of what comes after us is stunning. So the last thing we hear of Abraham is he has more sons, and we get to hear about how some of them have kids, and we see a bit of that genealogy. We know that his story is moving on in ways that we never foresaw, and now he goes back and he becomes no longer a part of the story that is happening now, but a part of the story that made the story that's happening now. And we see when he dies that his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. Now, not the other ones, but the other ones, do they have the same story? Have they been a part of this story as long? No, we just heard about it. But what does it make you feel that Ishmael comes back suddenly?
He was the firstborn.
He's the firstborn, so he probably wants to be there a little bit as well. Does there seem to be any animosity between Isaac and Ishmael?
Not in this. Not here.
No. There's something about this that's quite beautiful. And then while we get that piece that Ishmael's back and we get to see this, we also know what's about to happen. And in chapter 25, and the reason that it's all one big chunk, probably, is you get the 6 sons and they disappear. Ishmael comes back to bury with Isaac Abraham. And then we hear again, one, in the first part we read, Abraham gives everything he has to who?
Isaac.
Isaac. Okay, great. And now we hear, after the death of Abraham, in verse 11, God blessed his son Isaac. And now Isaac is settling in the land. That's just, Ber Halilroi. It's within the promised land. He's staying there. He's there. But we already know Ishmael's not. He's off there too. And he's doing his own thing. And so we get to see all the sons at once in this narrative. But both pieces of the other sons of other wives, concubines, not where notice with whom Abraham's being buried. Well, Hagar might be alive and Keturah might still be alive, but nevertheless, with whom is he being buried?
Sarah.
Sarah, yeah.
The one who was there in the beginning, the one who is a part of the promise, the one who is the mother of laughter, the one through whom the impossible happened, the one who was with Abraham for the promise. And while Abraham had more, we get to be reminded that the promise is not just Abraham's, but strangely, Abraham and Sarah's. And Ishmael comes back to remind us of the story, not just of Abraham, but of Sarah. And what is it like for Ishmael to bury his father with his half-brother at the grave of a woman who didn't like him or his mom?
Awkward.
It's awkward. It's loving. And it reminds us that they're brothers and they can get along for these things because they are both sons of Abraham. But the story has told us in two separate ways. Does the one who we expect should get all the stuff getting all the stuff? No. Is this the first time we've seen in the Bible that the firstborn doesn't seem to get it as nicely as the secondborn?
Cain and Abel.
Ah, so it's not the first time. How many times do we have to see something before it becomes more than just a coincidence or becomes a pattern? Is two enough, or do we need to see a third time?
Oh, no, there's Jacob and Esau.
You want to know when Jacob and Esau happens, Linda?
Soon.
Yeah, like this chapter.
Noah's children.
Noah's children, it doesn't quite work out in that same kind of way. Why does God keep doing things that don't make sense with regards how humans do things?
God seems to have a habit of siding with the downtrodden, for lack of a better word at the moment.
There is certainly that, the downtrodden mentality. God is that. But here in this midst of things, I mean, like, is Abel more downtrodden than Cain, or is Isaac more downtrodden than Ishmael? It's this odd way of God's providence, and at a time especially when the oldest born son was the paterfamilias, the ruler of the family, if you will. God keeps changing the narrative. God keeps messing it up a little bit. And with Isaac, we get it because he is the child of promise. When we got to Cain and Abel, we didn't really know what to do with that story because why did God choose one and not the other? Why does God keep doing things that God wants to that aren't in accordance with the way that we want God to do things? Because it's the way the world's set up and it's the way it should be.
Because God does as God pleases.
Partially because God does as God pleases. God gets to be God. Now, since we know that these 7 other sons are fathers of other nations, and yet they all have father Abraham, and we know, by the way, are the Israelites called the Isaacites? No, they're called the Israelites.
Yeah.
Isaac is going to matter so very little. He is the promise. But have we heard much from Isaac?
We don't.
No, the first thing we hear from him is like, where are we going to get the offering, Dad? And like, well... The second thing we get to see from him is when Rebecca shows up and he's like, oh. But who do we hear talk more, Rebecca or Isaac?
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca is the linchpin here. And so it seems as though Abraham dying, okay, now we have Isaac, but we're going to move past Isaac really fast. And Isaac is a second born, and it doesn't make any sense, but God's doing something, and does that mean God's going to do something in a time that we like?
Not necessarily.
One, it didn't really work out in a time that Abraham was going to like in the first place, right? He was 100 when Isaac was born. That makes, like, Isaac 75. It makes Ishmael like 85 when they're burying their father. Like, these are old men doing this by now, too. And yet they're established. They're being blessed. There's something going on. Anyone want to read verses 12 through 18?
Well, I'll give it a stab.
Thank you.
This is the account of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's maidservant Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael listed in the order of their birth. Naboth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Nephish, and Kedemah. Oh my.
Mhm.
Those were the sons of Ishmael, and those were the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Altogether, Ishmael lived 137 years, breathed his last, and died, and was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, as you go toward Asher, and they lived in hostility toward all their brothers.
Oh.
Hmm.
So we now see another genealogy of Abraham's, but this one's Ishmael's, and it also ends Ishmael's story. Do anyone happen to recall earlier how what Hagar was told, and I think Abraham was told as well, regarding what Ishmael would be given and what he would be as a person?
It was the 12 princes.
12 princes. And notice here that it fulfills the promise to Ishmael of there being 12 princes. Who had 12 first? Was it Ishmael or Isaac?
Ishmael.
Do they get along well with all of their neighbors? But notice that it says brothers. And while the 6 were the people like just east of Israel that they struggled with, Ishmael, these are the Arabian peoples. Further south, further east a little bit. And there's struggles there as well. But the Bible is letting the people who read this as a holy book in their promised land know that everybody they struggle against is also a son and daughter of Abraham.
So in verse 18, I'm reading from the NRSV, and it says he settled down alongside all his people, as opposed to what it sounded like was read, where it said they had trouble with the people around them.
So yeah, let me look at that, because verse 18's that way. The descendants, they settled. He settled down alongside all of his people. The alongside can also be translated down in opposition to. In your NRSV might have a footnote.
In defiance of.
Is that what your translation says?
Mhm.
Stephen, if you're looking at the NRSV, does it have a footnote next to alongside of?
Yeah, it says or down in opposition to.
So that is a translation difference, and this speaks of part of the problem with Hebrew, because doesn't the NRSV make it sound like alongside all of his people, like that's just kind of like, this is okay.
Yeah.
Was it the NIV you were reading from, Steve?
Yeah,
And or not Steve, who was reading that?
I was.
New American Standard.
American Standard. Okay, and so the NIV has hostility toward as well. So like we don't know how to translate this, but the NIV translation of it is hearkening back to what God said, or the angel said to Hagar, Ishmael was going to be like. He was going to be like a crazy ass of a man. Is that what they called him? And live kind of struggling against all of his kin. And so when whomever was translating, the committee was translating the NIV and the American Standard Version, were like, well, if he was supposed to be this way, maybe this word that can mean many things means this opposition to. And the NRSV people were like looking at it and saying, we don't know that even that whole way of like a wild ass of a man, that doesn't mean that maybe he will have this kind of other ways. It just might explain like his vigor and vitality. And so it's part of the problem of Bible translation and interpretation in general. Because the NRSV, and I'm glad you asked the question, because the NRSV is trying to say that Ishmael may not be this crazy like one. And the NIV and the American Standard and others are trying to say, yeah, well, this is what had already happened anyway, and it was promised from the beginning. And the joy of it is scholars of the Bible don't know which one's right. And if it's ambiguous, perhaps that means we can't just judge the situations there based off Bible stories about how all these people came to be, because the ambiguity within the scripture itself is supposed to lead us toward a realization of what is and a hope of what can be, because the Hebrew words are poetic enough to contain both. How's that for you?
My note, the NIV note at the bottom, 18 says, or possibly to the east of, instead of hostility towards. Quite different if you think about it.
That is, again, the joy of Hebrew. Because it can mean that too. And you can hear it in the things. Because if it's in opposition to that, like earlier, it has like opposite of Egypt in the NRSV, right? Stephen, I'm asking you because you have the NRSV. So in verse 18, does it say initially, like they settle in this place, which is opposite of Egypt?
Yeah, it says they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria.
And mine
And
says
he
near the
settled down.
border of Egypt.
Exactly. and so like border and opposite can be the same word. And border into the east, because if you're going to think about where it is, people might already start saying toward the east. And so they're playing with, I don't know the Hebrew of this passage, but I can tell right now as we're just doing this, this is a part they would put on a Hebrew exegesis exam for seminary students to see what they would do with it. And that the two most common translations for people in mainline denominations are the NIV and the NRSV, and they seem to be saying wildly different things in one verse. This gets to be a moment for all of us as students of the Bible to know that whatever we begin to believe about it, we have to take with a great dose of humility. Because we can't even find in the first 25 chapters two Bibles that agree with you. We've done this already. But this might mean exact opposite things. And I like the dichotomy, and I like that we grabbed onto it. And this is the fun of reading the Bible in multiple translations together. And there's more to be said about that, but we don't need to belabor anything. Because there's still a whole story that's really fascinating. And we're going to read it. And I'm going to read it. I'm taking pastor's prerogative because does anyone have a preference? You want me to do the NIV or the NRSV? I actually have both of them in front of me now. I'll tell you what, more of you have the different, like NIVs and ABV, or it doesn't matter. I'm reading this one. Verse 19. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son, Now stop. I'll stop us. This is the joy of being the one. How many genealogies are we doing now? There has been 3.
3.
This is the clearest sense that we have ended our story of Abraham as a person. And his story is massive. But are we focusing on the fullness of Abraham's story? No. We got the 6 and their brief genealogy. We have his death. Ishmael seems to be more important to the story. Ishmael buries with Isaac, and then we get Ishmael's story, and we hear of Ishmael's death. His story gets to be complete along with the promise that's been through him. But the child of promise, the one through whom the promise that God has foreseen is going to continue to go into the world. And as Christians, this is important to us because which lineage is the one that Christ comes from?
Abraham, Isaac.
Isaac.
So now we've had the ones that we just heard about, and now we have Ishmael, and we have his genealogy, but now the final one goes to Isaac, and these are his descendants. And it says Abraham was the father of Isaac. These are his descendants. And it starts with Abraham was his father. And Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel of the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Does that sound familiar?
A lot of Isaac's story is merely a rehash of Abraham's story. Like father, like son.
Except he talks less. Have we even heard his prayer? No, just that he made a prayer. And yes, Rebecca's barren, but is Rebecca's barrenness like apparently is like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen as Sarah's? No, he prays and it finally happens. Now, to be fair, he's not that young himself when it happens. But it happened. Now, wait a second. Hasn't every genealogy we've seen when we get to, hey, these are the descendants of, like, isn't the genealogies right away? Are we getting any genealogy yet?
No.
Oh, and this is why this part's brilliant. We are only going to get story after story after story after story. We don't get a list. We get the story. And this is the brilliant piece of the promise. There is other elements of the blessing of Abraham already taking effect. But the promise, the root of the promise is in the story of the descendants of Isaac. Because Abraham has all kinds of descendants. Doesn't that make you feel a little different when you start singing Father Abraham has many sons? Because if you are in the Middle East, basically what it's saying is, yeah, and I'm one of them, and so are you. But the promise piece, the thing that made Abraham's story the most unique, because he was a childless old man with a childless old wife. And God made an impossible promise. And it's the impossible promises story that we're going to follow. It's laughter's story that we're going to follow. And we get to know next to nothing about laughter other than he is the promise. And as we get to laughter, we're going to figure out that it's not even through him exactly yet. But we get to hear the story. And so Isaac is very much kind of in between Abraham and Jacob. But what is Jacob's other name?
Israel.
Israel.
So Isaac is this promise, but he isn't the one exactly. But we have to get to Jacob to figure it out, right? The children, oh, so wait, she conceived, but we hear children. Uh-oh, how many? Twins, perhaps? Anybody want to bet on twins? The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? And what does the NIV say there? Why is this happening
to me? Yeah.
The NRSV has a little asterisk there that says meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So she knows there's something going on within her. It's a hard pregnancy. So she went to inquire of the Lord. How much have we actually heard Isaac's voice since we've met Rebecca?
Not
Whose voice are we hearing now in the story of the descendants of Isaac?
Rebecca's.
Rebecca.
The next time someone tells you that women aren't important in the Bible, tell them to shut up because they don't know anything and they haven't even read it. And the Lord said to her, did God speak to Isaac? No, Rebecca just was able to conceive suddenly. Now, is that certainly a spoken, can someone say, I heard God answer my prayers? Sure. But who actually gets to hear God?
Rebecca.
What a fascinating thing. If Isaac's story mirrors his father's, as it does, Steve, you're absolutely right. Rebecca's story still is more like Abraham's than Isaac's is. Now, Isaac is going to do some of the same stupid things that his father did. Don't get me wrong. But who was the one that was called and came over just as Abraham? Who was the one that was promised a blessing just as Abraham and followed the blessing? This is all Rebecca. Rebecca was in the same land that Abraham started in. Rebecca came on a promise. Isaac is the child of promise. Rebecca is someone who still believes in the promise and has a sense of the promise for herself. And she is the part that is allowing Isaac to be the continuation of the promise, because she seems to be like Abraham, the one who speaks to God and God speaks to, and the one who has followed Abraham's journey. We say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And don't you feel sometimes as you look at Isaac's story a little bit more, it should maybe just be the God of Abraham, Rebecca, and Jacob? And God said to her, verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. What? Why?
no reason.
God has some reason, and we don't know what it is. And is it the way that we would do things?
Probably not.
Why does God keep doing things as we wouldn't do them in an effort to fulfill God's promises? And why does God tell Rebecca that the battle she feels in her womb is going to take place in the future between them as their nations? I don't have a clue. Verse 24, when her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. Shocking. The first came out red, and his body was a hairy mantle, like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. And Esau means hairy. It reminds me that my brother did karate with a kid whose name was Harry Pitts. And I was just always like, your parents need to be better people. Um, if you hear this later, I'm not judging you. I am. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob, which basically means heel grabber. Isn't that fun? Aryan heel grabber. And like Ishmael really got it good there, right? Like his name, like the Lord has like heard me. And then there's like, thank God that Jacob's gonna get a new name later. Heel grabber. But heel grabber is also supposed to give us a sense of there's a sense of grabbing the heel as someone who kind of gently attacks others, like is a little like conspiring, will try to meander and get his own kind of way. Jacob is the name of a scoundrel. And notice how they were fighting the womb to such a degree that Harry comes out and heel grabber is literally grabbing his heel as if to pull him back in the womb to come first.
Yeah, the footnote in the NRSV says grabs by the heel or supplants, which would be like to take over, which is what the story is.
Yeah, so we hear that the older is going to serve the younger. They're fighting in the womb. Who's even going to be the older? And the younger one comes out already supplanting, just to let us know in every conceivable way that this is a story where God again chooses the younger brother. And as we keep hearing these stories, does it feel to you like any person who heard the parable of the prodigal son the first time should be surprised?
Mm.
Then why are we always surprised when God goes about choosing those we don't expect? Why do we exist in a church that tries to figure it all out in a box and say who's in and who's out and have our theological reasons as to why, when it appears as though God is happy to just ruin it all? Would Rebecca had known anything about this had God not answered her prayer? No, maybe she would have thought, but God's just like, hey, this is going to happen.
I did notice it was kind of an interesting coincidence that it's Rebecca that God says that the elder shall serve the younger, and it's Rebecca who ends up choosing Jacob as her favorite.
Because Rebecca is more like Abraham. And what was it like for Abraham to hear that God was choosing Isaac when he thought the promise was finally fulfilled when Ishmael was born? Rebecca is the second generation Abraham. And if you really want to know why I think there's so few stories about Isaac, because we're gonna see, like, we're already getting to Jacob and Esau. Like, here's Isaac, let's go to Jacob and Esau, and then we're gonna get to the next chapter where Isaac just looks like his dad in strange ways that are the bad ways, but not the good ways, because all the good ways of his dad come through his wife. And they have scholars that say, well, maybe there just weren't many stories about Isaac or blah, 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 blah. I am convinced that the stories were all about Rebecca and people didn't want to hear them as time went on. But the stories that still exist paint a picture of a woman who is the second generation Abraham. And it's from her that Israel comes from, not from Sarah And ain't that fascinating? When the boys grew up, verse 27. Oh, wait. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So he had to wait 20 years after getting married for it. It's a little while. 60's, doesn't sound like his dad, but verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Does this sound like it's going to turn out well? You ever wonder why, like, doing things with God, for God, with others never seems to work out the way you'd like it to? And I always tell people, like, when I was like, even when I was young preacher, people were like, why isn't the church the way it's supposed to be? I'm like, have you read the Bible? It's never been easy, even as God's going about the work of the promise. And now we have a family where we get to hear one son is loved by the father, the older, one son is loved by the mother, the younger. Why do you think one might love one and one might love the other?
Well, it says that Isaac likes the game.
Isaac likes the game. If you're someone who wants someone to help take care of your family, do you want someone who's able to provide for your family?
Yeah.
Does that not seem like what you want in an older son? But we don't know much about Isaac. Isaac is just this kind of one who's there. And he seems to participate as the child who is promised, but he still kind of exists in the world as he thinks it should be. And Rebekah loves the younger. Does she love the younger because he likes to be quiet in a tent and maybe cooking things with her? Well, it seems maybe it has that kind of way. Does she love him more because she remembers how God answered her prayer? And if that's the case, did God answer her prayer that way intentionally to ensure that humans did a little bit of what they needed to do to make sure God's will was fulfilled, because it doesn't make any sense to us how God goes about doing it? And isn't that fascinating? I don't have an answer. And if you answer it, you can answer it any way, and you would not be wrong. As you can tell, chapter 25 of Genesis is terribly difficult to translate. Verse 29. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Edom means red, and remember that he came out looking red, and apparently this stew looked red. So now Edom. Do we know about the Edomites? And the answer, just because I said Edomites, should be yes, even if you don't know all those things in the Bible. All right, does Edom and Israel get along well? In case you're wondering, the answer is not particularly. Okay, so we have the promise. And we think we're going with Isaac, and he's now the child of promise, but we keep figuring out it's whittling down a little bit more. God needs an impossibility, a second son, who then is going to be apart through another second son, as a wife acts as a second Abraham to kind of make it happen. Apparently, it doesn't even take in one generation to fulfill the promise through that kind of way as we were expecting. And what does that mean if we have to play the whole game over again still to move toward the story? I don't have a clue. But it's fascinating to me. And I need to stop belaboring it because we're getting here toward the end, and I'm famished, therefore he was called Edom. Verse 31, Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." What? Why is Jacob asking for this? Well, because he's heel holder. That's why. Like, he's the supplanter. That's what happens. He was named this. His mom knew this was going to happen. Did she ever tell Isaac? Apparently not. Did she tell the sons? Apparently not. The only one who knows this oracle is Rebecca. And yet we're watching God make it happen. And yet it's such a strange way. If you read the story and you come in and you have this idea, I'm famished, give me something to eat, only if you sell your birthright, what would you say if you were Esau?
Forget it.
Get it. Now,
No.
also,
It just depends on how hungry you are.
see, Stephen, that's interesting that you say that because we have a tendency of forgetting things. We've already seen that there was a famine that moved Abraham to Egypt. We know that there's going to be another famine that moves Jacob to Egypt at the end and causes his whole thing. We say famished and we like, oh, I'm starving. Have I ever been starving when I said I'm starving?
Nope.
I hope not.
No. Now, so it's so easy that I always hear people judge him here, telling that Esau is just selling his birthright for nothing because what, he's hungry? He might literally be famished. And then what about Jacob? What kind of brother are you if your brother, who may literally be like, please give me some of that red stuff? Some scholars think that by the red stuff, he means blood. Like he thought maybe there was just blood in there. But I'm not going down that rabbit hole because one, I don't think that to matter. But like, and he's like, first you have to sell me your birthright. Then Esau said, I'm about to die. So again, maybe he was being literal. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Did we hear anything about God in those things since God responds to Rebecca? No. Does the narrator seem to think this is God doing it right now, or is this human agency being human agency?
Human agency.
Does Jacob seem like a good person?
No.
Kind of a sneaky person.
He is. We're only beginning to see that Jacob is someone who truly sucks. Notice how God is using people that we would classify in all kinds of ways who shouldn't be there. And in ways that don't make a lick of sense. So please, never think that there is anything you can do in this life or the next that can possibly make God give up on you if God says, I choose you. And why is it so important for us to remember that Jesus says to us in John's gospel, you did not choose me, I chose you. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all just trust our own chosenness so that we stop beating ourselves up and embrace our belovedness. But Heel Grabber will eventually have a new name, and that name is
Israel.
Wrestled with
That's
God.
real.
Israel. Struggles with God. You know what happens when God chooses you? God really doesn't let go of you.
You're doomed.
But what happens when you want to do what you want to do?
You don't.
You might, and God's going to let you, but God doesn't let go of you. God will take you kicking and screaming. And Jacob is the heel grabber, schemer, kicking and screaming. And it doesn't work out well for him either, really. His life is not the easiest, but God's going to do what God's going to do with humans, and humans are going to do what they're going to do. And yes, we can stymie God's will for a while. But God's going to use us no matter what, if God chooses to use us no matter what. And guess what? You lot are with me on Zoom on 7:06 p.m. that didn't even get an email to remind you this was going on. So some people just like, oh, it must not be happening. Maybe he's sick. And if you don't think you've been chosen by Christ, then you're just wrong, because I don't know what else would bring you here. The fullness of your ancestors led you to this moment. That's pretty cool. Anyway, I thank you for the day, and thank you for these people, and amen.
Just out of curiosity, we talked about Isaac being like Abraham, the story. Also, Abraham was very, very fond of Ishmael.
He was.
Even as the Lord, are you going to take care of him? You know, and so here Esau is in favor of Isaac, and Sarah was very fond of Isaac.
Isaac is like all the ways of his father that weren't the promise, and Rebecca is all the ways of Abraham that were the promise. And isn't that weird? No. Do we think we're done with this weird choosing of sonsness?
Probably not.
No. You want to wonder, anyone wonder how many more generations until we get to experience it again?
So Joseph,
Oh, Joseph, yeah.
The one.
Mhm.
How about if we just go to Joseph? What about his? Is there, how does anyone remember how many sons he had?
Two?
2, I think.
Yeah, and did they finally have a normal thing, or did something happen there too?
Something happened.
Yeah, and that's a story we know less, but still the younger one is chosen. It just keeps not working the way we would expect. Generation after generation after generation, as if to constantly remind us, just because it's the way it's supposed to be, or the way it's always been done, or this is how we do it here, God doesn't care, over and over and over and over again. Because you know it's true.
Mhm.
They say it's a fearful thing to be placed in the hands of a living God, but I will also say it's a crazy thing to be placed in the hands of a living God. If you think you can figure it out, why don't you do me the great favor and go outside if it's clear tonight and stare at the stars and tell me how it works. And if you can tell me how all the stars work, then you might be able to begin to explain to me the nature of the divine. No, we just get to be placed in the hands of a living God. And God's will is going to be done, and a promise is going to come. And we are people who believe that this lineage of promise is the one that gives us Jesus the Christ. And we are going to see story after story that moves in that way. And do you remember some of the crazier stories? The story of Lot and his daughters, and how that one is in the story of how Jesus gets to be. And so we see all these crazy stories, and all of the crazy stories, all of the weird brokenness is still leading to the one who can be the righteous one that can save all things. So maybe we should have more hope in this world. And maybe we should realize we're all brothers. And maybe the ambiguity of whether they settled next to them or were in opposition to them can suddenly be made clear because we choose to settle next to a little bit more than be in opposition to. And that's all cool. And I'm done talking about it. Any questions before? I forgot to turn on my overhead light, so I'm getting closer to my camera so I can not fade.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you.
Mhm, Thank
Time.
you.
Yeah.
I did have a quick question. Is there a difference between a birthright and a blessing?
Yes. And this is why the birthright now has been taken, and you will see later the blessing be given. And the birthright is all the stuff. The blessing is much more kind of unique in a spiritual kind of sense of the religiosity of the time. And we'll see that. Well, we'll see that soon.
Good night.
Good night, dear soul.
Good night.
Be well.